playing. I guess it's okay.
What I thought I'd do is quickly try to give you some idea of what I want you to do with your papers, so you can start thinking about it now. Also start running through, candidate rules for yourself, and think about what's involved in them. And but I also want to sort of build a context for why we're studying being in time at all. This doesn't seem much like it would be an ethics book. It's more like an ontology book, right? So what has this got to do with ethics? And so what I'd like to illustrate very quickly, I'm assuming now that most of you are going to stay in the class. If you were going to drop, you had a good chance to do it by now. So ethics is about right and wrong. In philosophy, it's about the words right and wrong. Like, what does the word right mean? What does the word wrong mean, right? And they'll fight a lot about right and wrong, but you're not so worried about how people live. You're just worried about getting the right words together, right? So philosophy in many ways is like word puzzles or word math, right? It's applying logical principles to languages in various ways. And the trouble with teaching ethics like that for me is that it doesn't get to what I think is the really important thing, which is what you do, right? So I think that sometimes we think there's a connection like this, that our beliefs drive our actions, right? And that if we have the right beliefs, then we will start doing the right things, right? We'll have the right behaviors. But my experience in life and my experience in observing other people is that there's only a really loose connection between beliefs and actions. That people do things that are contrary to their beliefs all the time, and they have beliefs that never get into action, right? Like, for instance, how many of us think you should help the poor? Probably most. How many actually spent time today helping anybody who was poor? So you have this belief, but in some ways, I think sometimes our beliefs are themselves actions, but they're actions that prevent good actions. No matter what your beliefs are, right? Like sometimes my belief that I should help the poor, if I think about that a lot and I watch a video about poor people and I see somebody else helping the poor and it makes me cry and then I feel better about it and then I don't actually go help the poor because I've been thinking about helping the poor so much, it's been really satisfying to think about helping the poor. So that desire to help others just completely spent itself out in thought and never made its way into action. I think that happens not just occasionally, I think it happens a lot, right? That our beliefs never really translate into action. And so I start thinking about that. Why is that, right? Like, what are we getting wrong when we think that if we just get the right beliefs, we'll get the right actions? And I think part of that is we start from the wrong place. The only thing I have noticed in my life that gets me to do good things is, it's going to sound really circular, doing good things. Thinking about doing good things may or may not have any relationship to my actually doing good things. But doing something good always returns to doing more good. For whatever reasons that is. When I start with actions, what I end up doing is getting more actions, right? But if I start with beliefs, equally so, what I get is more beliefs. But these don't necessarily ever come out here, right? So I thought, how would I teach ethics in such a way to clear space for people to do this? Now, what I could do, and I have done this in the past, I work with a charity called Give Hope, Fight Poverty, and we help orphans in Swaziland. It's a landlocked country in Africa where it costs about $300 a year for a kid to go to elementary school. It has the highest number of deaths related to AIDS per capita in the world. And so therefore it has a huge number of orphans, 12-year-olds, who are head of the household. And they're incredibly poor. They live in like sticks over their roof, sticks, little mud huts that the tribe will give to them. Many of these kids get taken advantage of, all kinds of things. So in the past, I have done fundraisers, right, where we just spend the first couple weeks of class, we read a philosopher who makes us all feel really guilty about not doing enough good for poor people, and then I give students the option to do this. But that always seems disingenuous in some ways, although it's probably better than not doing it, now that I say it out loud. But it's still, like, I don't think I can really legitimately use my position as a professor to highly motivate you to donate your time or energy to getting money to help orphans. Great if you want to do it on your own, but that should be a more voluntary choice than what I might, pressure you to do. So I stopped doing that actively. So what I thought I'd do instead of actually trying to get you to do good things, because how do I grade that, right? Like this is just not the job of a professor to say, go do good things, come back and report on it, right? Like, I don't know, that would seem weird. So what I thought I'd do instead is highlight the difference between beliefs and actions. Actions are things you do, and that have to do with your body moving, right? Beliefs, on the other hand, I'm going to keep putting this up here. Beliefs have to do with thoughts. And though I do think that thoughts also have to do with your body, that is, you cannot think if you don't have a body, and the body has to do with all kinds of things, neurons for one of them, but your thinking happens all through your body, not just in your mind. But there does seem to be a fallacy in thinking that it only goes this way, right? That is, that our beliefs affect our actions, but that our actions aren't themselves independent of our beliefs, or that they don't also come and have something to do with our beliefs, right? So instead, what I'm going to do with this class is highlight this relationship in some ways. How is it that what we have taken to be two completely separate realms, soul and body, for instance, or mind and body, or beliefs and actions, and explain to you that that is not at all how we live our lives, right? So my ultimate aim is to show you that really these are just categories for explaining ourselves to ourselves, but that what we do in our everyday life doesn't resemble this at all. Like this is just a nice story that we tell ourselves, but it's entirely fiction. If not entirely fiction, mostly fiction. It's useful, but fictitious. Equally, though, people in the psychology department would say otherwise, this idea that you have an ego and an id and a superego and a subconscious and a conscious, totally fiction. It's just garbage. But it's helpful. It's helpful fiction. It's a nice story to tell. No more true or false than Plato's myth of It's a helpful fiction. It gets us through to explaining really interesting things about ourselves, but it's not nearly the case. We are much more complicated than that. And what that means is that we cannot divide ourselves up into little categories of things, body and mind. In order to help you to see that, Heidegger is one of the very best. Before you can really think about what kind of person you want to be, what kind of person is a good person, and therefore assuming you want to be a good person, that's the kind of person you want to be. Before you can even get there, you got to have some idea of the complexity that is you. And I don't think I don't have it at the bottom. Like there's a lot here that is just sort of superficially thought through on my end. I don't know that I can get answers to some of the things that we'll uncover with Heidegger. But before you can even genuinely think about the kind of person you want to be, you have to have a good sense of what you are. And most of us have no idea. And the best way to show you that you have no idea is to have you read someone who will prove it to you, right? And that's exactly what Being in Time is going to do. Being in Time highlights this part of our lives that is existence. And even better, he's going to highlight it as existence as we are in our average everyday. All of us are good people and exceptions. Right? We do good things exceptionally. And not just, that doesn't mean just like really well, but every once in a while, when the exception comes around, right? But it's our average every day that makes us good or bad, right? It's not the things we do when we are doing something special, doing something unusual, right? And what Heidegger is going to help you to see is what goes into an average everydayness is a kind of existence that cannot be reduced to beliefs that cause actions. And so what we're going to see is what Heidegger calls a world and the worldhood of the world, and we're going to get to all of that in a little bit. And what I want you to think through when we're dealing with Heidegger here is to try to gain some understanding of how what you have thought of yourself as being doesn't quite explain the complexity of how you live in an average everyday way. And that should have an impact on the way you decide to live from this point forward. And when you're thinking about that clearly, the few moments where it will sink in, that's when you need to make a rule. You make the rules not when you feel like doing good or when you don't feel like doing good. You make the rules when you see yourself clearly and you see where you want to be clearly. Then you make the rule, because then it's going to get cloudy again, because that's just the way life is. You will lose sight of this clarity. But if you have a rule that you made when you saw things clearly, and you just trust that you made that rule when you saw things clearly, then you just hold to the rule. And you wait for the clarity to come back and remind you. But you hold to the rule no matter what, right? So that the rules to live by, you have to pick the right times to make them. And you can't force it. And it has to come when the world emerges in certain ways. And Heidegger will help us think that through. But when you make a rule, when you see clearly, you have to trust that that rule is one that you will keep. And that it will make you into the kind of thing that you decided clearly you wanted to become, right? And then you adjust them as you go through life, through experience. So you'll never be finished. You'll never be complete. With that in mind, I'm going to share with you 4 of my rules. 4 rules that I live by. Most of the time I fail by. Well, sometimes I fail by, but not always. The first one is just a principle, right? And I'll expect you to have some rules for yourselves to live by. The first one is a principle, and it goes something like this, although I have different ways that I will describe it to myself. But it is that vigilance is the price you pay for improvement. Now, that's not really a rule. There's nothing for me to do there, right? It's not an always or a never. That is the principle that underrides all of my rules. The only way they work is if I am vigilant. By vigilant, I mean I have to watch. I have to pay attention. I have to be honest with myself, right? Vigilance doesn't mean I find the easiest way for me to keep my rule. It means I have to look deeply, honestly, penetratingly into myself and be vigilant and careful. And what am I watching against? So vigilance is a nice word. I use this word on purpose because we want our soldiers to be vigilant when they're on the front line. And what does that mean? They're looking for the enemy, right? The enemy is sneaking in. You have to be vigilant to keep them out, right? Now, what is my enemy? Turns out I am. What most of all is my enemy in terms of improvement is dishonesty with myself. Now, I'm going to give you one really simple example of this. I'm not going to share with you any real serious faults of mine. I'll share with you the superficial faults, right? One fault that I have is an active imagination, and I imagine in my mind I can do all kinds of things that I either can do if I really worked at it, but I don't want to do the work. I'd rather just imagine it. I get almost all the benefits of imagining great things without any of the work by just imagining, right? This is a weakness in me. I love to imagine success. But when I imagine success, it's terribly dishonest. And it robs me of actually succeeding in many, many ways. I'll give you one small way. I have a hobby. I do triathlons. And I spend an inordinate amount of time in my basement riding on a little trainer and doing nothing, going nowhere, but I'm all over the world in my mind. I'm destroying people in races. I'm winning the Olympics. I'm like the greatest athlete ever in my mind, right? But in the real world, what am I doing? I'm just pedaling a bike in the basement, sweating with a fan in my face, right? Like doing nothing really, right? So vigilance equals improvement. Means, first of all, of course, if I want to improve as an athlete, I got to daily, every day, even when I don't feel like it, I got to be vigilant. My biggest enemy, the feeling I don't want to do it, right? That feeling, this just sucks. I don't feel like it today, right? Vigilance. Okay, but more importantly here in this realm of belief, I have to actively fight against my tendency to imagine success. Now, sports psychologists will tell you, no, you should be imagining your success all the time, right? You should, and the more deeply you can imagine it, the better. I have learned by my experience that is BS. Because imagining my success robs me of actively achieving it. Because it's a lot easier to just imagine it. So every time now, when I'm riding my bike in the basement, on the trainer, and I get the temptation, and now it's a temptation, to think of myself as succeeding, I have to say to my own self, shut up. You're not thinking that. Just do this. Just do what you're doing now. There's no future here. You're just doing this. That's how I have to fight my own dishonesty. Right? Now, when we get to Spinoza, you're going to see Spinoza has helped me to think about that. Because the proud person, so another way to say this is, I let my pride get in my way. The proud person imagines in his mind that he can do all the things in reality that he imagines himself able to do, and in that way becomes totally annoying to everybody else. Right? In our pride, I like to think of myself. So, first rule, vigilance equals improvement. What am I watching out for? Myself. Dishonesty with myself, right? Heidegger gives me another way to think about this rule. I could say it in 2 words, take care. But take means here to actively, Heidegger's already told you, he defines Dasein as care. We're going to see what that means, what care is. But taking care, you take it from someone else who's holding it. You have to rip it